Hello again, MTAV1s. I'm going to continue with the remainder of our overview of ornamental fifth progressions. We've done the auxiliary ornamental fifth progression and we've done the passing 6/4 ornamental fifth progression. So we continue to where? Passing 6/4s. We continue to page 131 of the set of notes, section 5.3.3, and it is entitled Ornamental Fifth Chords Connecting a Sequence of Predominant Structural Chords with Root Movements in Descending Thirds. Now let me just remind you that what we said about the ornamental fifths is that they are applicable, remember, page 124, to the 4 predominant chords. If you are in your structural tonal sentence, the 4 predominant chords, this is your structural harmony notes, is 1, 6, 4 and 2. 1, 6, 4 and 2. So those are the chords I'm talking about, predominant, because they are the ones that go to the dominant in your tonal sentence. They are the ones that can take ornamental fifth progressions. The dominant group of chords, like 5 and 3, they don't take ornamental fifth progressions. So what this particular use is concerned with is using all 4 of those chords. That's what a sequence of predominant structural chords means. Remember, we can arrange them in a sequence. We spoke about that last time. Just want to check that you can see this page, where you would go from the tonic, if you used all 4 in a row. You would go from the primary in the tonic group to the secondary, and then you would go from the primary in the subdominant group to the secondary. And in so doing, each of these would be a descending third. So there's a kind of this is the pattern, go down, root movement. If I say root movement, I mean the root of this chord goes down a third to the root of that chord. So then you do the same here. The root of chord 6 goes down a third to get to the root of chord 4, and then the root of chord 4 goes down a third to get to the root of chord 2. So there's a sequence there. Before you go to that, those are the predominants, and then you get your cadence, which is, you know, some kind of a so that's got nothing to do with the sequence, it just completes the tonal sentence. So what I'm talking about now is a further way in which that thing is used. A sequence of predominant structural chords with root movements in descending thirds. There's a particular way in which the ornamental fifths are used to kind of play on that sequence. And it's based on the idea, a kind of a mixture of the auxiliary, that was 5.3.1, and the passing 6/4, 5.3.2, the 2 different kinds of ornamental fifths that we've had thus far. I just want to make sure you can see this page. In the case of the auxiliary, the important thing that we take from it is that it has, apart from the fact that we have lower auxiliary melodies that we spoke about, it's the third of the chord and the doubled root of the chord that get lower auxiliaries. That is the basis on which the auxiliary, now I'm talking specifically the auxiliary 5-3. You get the two kinds. I mean, you can have that in the bass, or you can actually jump in the bass like that. That's what we spoke about at section 5.3.1. So I'm talking about the one that jumps from the root of the structural chord to the root of the ornamental chord. And then we always have, remember, in the ornamental fifth regressions, we always have the anchor note, which is the fifth of the structural chord that stands still. So that was the auxiliary 5-3 pattern. And the important thing here is the lower neighbor note. First of all, the fact that the third of this chord comes down when it gets its ornamentation. It's a descending ornamentation. And then the other important thing that we want to take from it in 5.3.3 is the root jump over there. Okay, those are the two things we want to look at. The other, now, how it connects with passing 6/4s is that in the case of the passing 6/4, we don't have an auxiliary figure so much as we turn it into a passing note melody. So we said that we would actually take the auxiliary pattern and we would turn it into two mirror patterns, remember, where you go from the third of this chord down a passing note to the root, and then you have a mirror pattern where you have the root of the chord up a passing note to the third. Either of these two could be in the bass, remember. So your structural chord could be in root position going to first, or it can be in first inversion going down to root. You would always have the fifth of the chord as an anchor note. And then you would retain from your auxiliary progression also the idea of the doubled root that gets a lower neighbor note and goes back. And in the process, you would create an ornamental fifth chord in second inversion, of which that is the fifth, that is the third, that is the root, and that is the doubled fifth. So the other thing that 5.3.3 does is specifically to take the idea of the descending passing note melody. This has implications for 5.3.3, and of course also the in fact also this one and that one. Those two also go to 5.3.3. So the only one that doesn't is the bass line that moves up by step. So it's a kind of a mixture, what we're going to do now, between those things. And it starts off, I think the logic of it would be if you mixed those two. Let me just get another page to write on. Let me just check that you can see this page. Okay, so it would be the idea of the jumping bass and the idea of the descending passing note melody. Those are the two significant parts. So from that would be a kind of an adaptation of the passing 6/4, where you take, I'm just going to stick to C major's tonic for now as our example. If you took the descending passing note melody that goes from the third of the chord through a passing note to the root of the chord, that comes out of the passing 6/4 pattern, and you combined it with the idea of jumping to the ornamental fifth, which you can go up 5 or down 4, doesn't matter, it's the same thing. Go down 4 and back. If you take those two things as the defining characteristics of 5.3.3, and then with that would go retention of the lower auxiliary idea, and then also retention of the anchor note. Excepting now there's no third in this chord anymore, so instead of keeping the anchor note right through to the third step, the third phase, what you have to do, in fact, is to jump down a third here, so that you can provide this chord with a third. So you've got a root and a third, and 2 more roots over there. It's that idea. If you were to repeat that sequentially now, remember this is a sequence of structural chords, with predominant structural chords with root movements in descending thirds. So the idea is that you would do that, and then you would do it at the chord 6 level, 6, 3, 6, and then at chord 4 level, and then chord 2 level. It means, in other words, that chord 6, there it is, 6, 3, 6. That's its ornamental fifth. Chord 3 is the ornamental fifth for chord 6. At subdominant level, sorry, I'm running out of space here, it would be chord 1. And at supertonic level, it would be chord 6. And if you take that pattern every time, it means that da-da-dum must go to the third of chord 6, da-da-dum. Then it must go to the third of chord 4, da-da-dum. And then the third of chord 2, da-da-dum. So you get this long descending scale, but it's that idea. But when you do that, you can see that what happens is that the root of this structural chord is always the same melody note as the third, the beginning of the sequence, the third of the next chord. The root of CEG is the same as the third of ACE, and so that you keep repeating that note from pattern and to sequence. The root of ACE is the same as the third of FAC. The root of FAC is the same as the third of DFA. So there's a kind of a repetition that happens. So it becomes quite repetitive. So what composers actually do in reality is that, because they want a nice flowing scale that doesn't have those repeated notes in, which are quite jarring, is to say, let's leave out the repetition, and we'll do that by saying, let's take away phase 3 in every step. If I take it away, take away F over there. If I do that, then what I'm left with is just the original structural chord with a third in root position, jump to the auxiliary or to the ornamental fifth chord in root position, and then from there you leave out phase 3 and you go straight to phase 1 of the next level. Leave out that chord and go straight to phase 1 of the next level and its ornamental fifth, and then you go to the supertonic. Now what normally happens is that the supertonic is just the point of arrival, because you can't chop up the supertonic because it hasn't got another descending third to go to. So it's usually just, you know, stands as an individual structural chord there. You can't compose it out in this particular manner. Okay, so if you leave out step 3, what you end up with, phase 3 at each level. That's what I'm showing there. These are phase 1, 2, 3 at each level. And yeah, what you've done is you've taken away phase 3, so that you just go from the structural to its ornamental fifth, and you go straight to the next structural and its ornamental fifth, straight to the next structural and its ornamental, and then you just finish on the supertonic. That's what that is. Just a point about how very common this particular sequence is It is common throughout the history of tonal music, page 131. From Baroque right through to Romantic music, and it is also very frequently used in contemporary popular music. It's used in various guises in pop music and in contemporary kind of church music, if you like, gospel music. You can think about, well-known tunes, church music types of tunes, like that type of melody. It is basically this progression. There are a lot of pop songs that have that type of thing as well, that idea of the descending scale, which involves your predominant chords with ornamental fifths in the middle. The one I'm thinking of now is not one that you might know, but it was a very popular pop song when I was young, called The Whitest Shade of Pale. It goes... something like that. I don't remember the rest of the tune so very well, but it is basically that progression. So it has survived beyond Bach, through Mozart, through Brahms, right into contemporary forms of music. You can use it such as these bullets. You can use the whole thing, 164, that goes right through and resolves on 2, or you can just use a part of it. Sometimes it's also truncated from 1 and its ornamental 5, and then 6 and its ornamental 3 up to there, and then it leaves out 4 and it goes from 3 to 2, and then it stops there. In this instance, the supertonic would actually replace the more usual subdominant as a resolution after the ornamental chord 3. And then important thing about the minor key, because remember this is a descending scale now. The whole thing is based on the idea of a descending scale. So if you're in a minor key and you've got a descending scale, what do you have to do? The melody is a descending scale. You have to use the unraised leading note, né? Melodic minor descending. Also, you have to remember that that is not a structural dominant. It's an ornamental dominant. The place where the structural dominant happens in a minor key in this progression is once it has ended. That's the dominant. There it is. The dominant is not there. Okay? The dominant is there. This is tonic, submedian, subdominant, supertonic, dominant. So in a minor key, that dominant has an unraised leading note. That dominant has a raised leading note. This is not a structural dominant, that is. So that one must have a raised leading note. So in a minor key, it's going to go from a minor tonic to a minor dominant to a subdominant, submedian. And the same thing now, unraised leading note in the median means a major median chord, not a raised in C minor. You don't want to be natural here because it's going down to A flat. And then just a note about the supertonic, although it is often included to complete the sequence of predominant chords with root movements in descending thirds, the supertonic chord is not likely to be subjected to this particular form of ornamentation. So if it is there, it just occurs unadorned. You can't do it because there's not another descending third to connect it with. And that's the reason why it is usually unadorned. So what I'm showing Let me just check it. You can see that page. Figure 132, page 132, figure 5.9 is basically exactly that. So what you can see is when you do that and you don't have the auxiliaries going back, there's no phase 3 for it to go back to, what ends up happening is that you have two descending scales, in fact. You have one starting from the third of the chord, the one that's in the soprano there, but with it goes what should have been in the alto a lower auxiliary. You should have gone do, ti, do, but you're not going back to tonic. So in fact, do, ti connects to the root of the submedian, la, so, which connects to the root of the subdominant, la, fa, mi, which connects to the root of supertonic. So what was the passing note, descending passing note melody of the passing 6/4 stays 1, accepting that phase 3 is now also phase 1 of your next level. What was the lower auxiliary melody, da-da-dum, now it just becomes a lower passing note. And then what happens to what was the anchor note 5th is you have your anchor note 5th, like the tenor there, accepting that there isn't a phase 3 where it gets repeated. It simply jumps down a third and has the anchor note for the submedian chord. 5th of the submedian, which stands and becomes the double root of its ornamental 5th, which is mediant. And then again it jumps down a third. 5th of subdominant is the anchor note, the double root of its ornamental 5th, which is tonic, and then another descending third to the 5th of supertonic. Your bass line then jumps from, like it would have in the auxiliary 5/3 pattern, it jumps from the root of the structural to the root of the ornamental, but instead of going back, it now leaves out step 3, and from there it simply goes to the root of the next level, and then it goes to the root of the next level. So you get a bass line that typically goes down a 4th, up a 2nd, down a 4th, up a 2nd. You probably know this best as that very well-known canon in D by the composer Pachelbel. It's a very well-known progression. And then comes the cadence. So all right, that is the one form in which it occurs. The other form in which it occurs is the interchangeability of these two roots. The root that goes from the root of this one to the root of that one, down a 4th, up a 2nd, down a 4th, up a 2nd, and the one that goes from the root of this chord, a descending passing note, to the root of that chord, to a descending passing note. In other words, in both cases, you would have your structural chord in root position, whichever one of these two roots you used in the bass. The difference would be if you put that alto melody and you put it in the bass, you would have this GBD chord would be in first inversion. Then you would go to the ACE chord in root position. Then you would have your E minor chord, your ornamental 5th would be with a G in the bass, it would be in first inversion. Then FAC would be in root position. Then your CEG ornamental 5th chord would be in first inversion with the E in the bass, and then the D chord would be in root position. You swap those two around. Can you see that's what I've done at B? I've taken what was the bass and I've put it into the alto. And I've taken what was in the alto and I've put it into the bass. So that my ornamental 5th chord is every time in first inversion, and I've created a descending scale in the bass. Those are the two forms in which you use this progression. But in both, your structural chords are in root position. It's just your ornamental 5th can either be in root position or it can be in first inversion. But you will always have those same ingredients, exactly the same 4 tunes. 2 descending scales, the one goes mi, re, do, ti, la, the other one goes do, ti, la, so far. And then you have the anchor note melody that jumps down by third every time, and you have the root, 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 down a fourth, up a second, down a fourth, up a second. You have that tune. You've got to have those 4 tunes. It's a non-negotiable. There's no other way to do this progression. Okay. And then I'm just showing you some examples here. Page 133. First, where it's an auxiliary 5/3 chord, creating a bass pattern that alternates between descending fourths and ascending seconds. Do, so, la, mi, that kind of bass line. But now you have to remember that it's written out in keyboard style, so that what looks like a up a third, down a fifth. Oh, sorry, it's D minor. You have to read that, in other words, as bass and tenor. Okay, bass goes D, tenor goes F. Bass goes A, tenor goes E. Bass goes B flat, tenor goes D. And the same with the right hand passage. There's a soprano and an alto here. The soprano is going F, A, D, F, B flat, D, and the alto is going D, C, B flat, A, G. So that you have a, if you wrote it in 4-part harmony, it would sound like that. So that is your bass is the one that's going from the root of this chord to the root of the 5th, down a 4th, and then up a 2nd, and down a 4th, and up a 2nd, and down a 4th. But notice now, because it's a D, and your alto is going from the root of D, F, A, down to the C, root of B flat, D, F, down to the A, root of the G. So it's a descending D minor scale. That's in the alto. And notice it's not a C sharp. Although we're in D minor, you do not use a C sharp there, because it isn't minor dominant, it's an ornamental dominant. This is not the dominant in the tonal sentence. There's the dominant in the tonal sentence. There. Once the sequence is finished, you're in the predominant stage until you get to supertonic, and then you only go to dominant, and then you only bring in C sharp. So the first one is an A minor chord. And the same with a mediant here. You don't want a C sharp, you don't want a mediant augmented, because it's going down. The C is going down to B flat. Now here's an interesting chord. In D minor, normally I said to you, you have to stop at the supertonic. You can't compose out the supertonic with its ornamental 5th, especially not in a minor key, because in the minor key, supertonic is a diminished chord, e.g. B flat. And you cannot compose out a diminished chord with its own ornamentation. But now notice what Beethoven has done here. He hasn't used E-G B flat. He's used E flat G B flat. And then he goes to the dominant. So he's given to its own ornamental 5th. And he's used a chord that we call the Neapolitan chord. It's a major chord. If you're in D minor, chord 2 is E, G, B flat. If you flatten the root of E, G, B flat, you get E flat, G, B flat. So it's a chromatic kind of supertonic chord. It's called the Neapolitan chord. And it makes it into a major chord. And once it's a major chord, it can take its own ornamental 5th. E flat's ornamental 5th is B flat, which is the submediant of D minor. So just an interesting little twist that he puts there, whereas I said you'd normally stop when you get to chord 2. If you do what Beethoven did and you actually turn it into a chromatic major form, then you could include its own ornamental fifth. Okay, here's another minor sequence, and notice again, the ornamental fifth of tonic in a minor key doesn't have a raised leading note in it. The ornamental fifth of chord 6, which is 3, is not 3 augmented but 3 major. It doesn't have the raised leading note. The first time you get the raised leading note, C sharp, is when you get to the dominant after the sequence is finished. Then you go to, this is the predominant part. Only when you get to the dominant part do you bring the C sharp in. The other thing that this is an example of is what I call the truncation of the sequence, where you go from 1 and its ornamental fifth you go to 6 and its ornamental fifth, and then you don't go to 4 as you normally would and its ornamental fifth, but from chord 6 and its ornamentation you go straight to chord 2, and then the cadence. 6 goes straight to 2 and leaves out 4. Okay, and then finally the example, the question of the checking that you can see this page, of not jumping in the bass but taking the scale and putting it in the bass, starting from the doubled root. So in fact what Beethoven has done here, he doesn't even have that da 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 da, he's left it out entirely and he's only got 3 notes in the chord. Sorry. So it goes from tonic in root, it goes to dominant in first inversion, then submediant in root, and then mediant in first inversion, then subdominant in root, and then tonic in first inversion. Each one with its ornamental fifth. And then you get that E in the bass, which goes to the D sharp, which goes to the C sharp, which goes to the B, which goes to the A, which goes to the G sharp. The descending scale. All right.